Hey, this is Stucci here, and for today's video, I wanted to talk a bit about Dota2 and value judgments across ranking Dota2 teams, whether that's thinking about who are the top five now, or thinking about them in the context of history or within their region. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because a lot of it doesn't make sense consistently, at least with the arguments I've seen in the community. Like, for instance, like some people still try to say like, oh, China was as strong now as it was a few years ago. Like, objectively, it doesn't really make sense. And I'm looking at, when I look at these arguments, like basically, don't know what exactly caused it. Whether that's because of like the fandom around pro players and teams, where outside of the community, it's actually hard for like a caster or analyst to legitimately criticize them, like with harsh language, I guess. Like you're, for instance, you're not gonna get Thorn saying like, no, this is bullshit. Like, this guy's completely overrated. Even if he's very good, he's still overrated or whatever, right? And so when I'm looking at these particular rankings or arguments, whatever, like basically, I think they've all been warped in a sense by the international. And the reason the international was warped all arguments is because the international is such an important event relative to every other event in the Dota 2 calendar that it sometimes can convince people to completely ignore all events outside of it. So that's why you have somebody like Naha saying, well, you can't really judge Chinese teams until you get to the months preceding to TI. And I know what he means in the sense, like, in terms of motivation, in terms of skill, obviously the Chinese teams are kick it up once they get to April, once they get to March or May, and then running into TI, because that's when they really fucking try hard, right? But here's the point, is it doesn't really make sense to only apply that to the Chinese teams and then not apply that to the Western teams, or not apply that to other teams, or conversely, or do the reverse. Like, only make you for some reason you have to like judge the Western teams across what they did an entire year, instead of just those months running into TI. And there are a few arguments I could bring up. First, I guess, is let's start with Liquid. Right, so Liquid's 5-man lineup: Kuroki, Miracle, Matumba Man, Mind Control, GH. Alright, now this 5-man lineup is arguably the best 5-man lineup we've ever seen across Dota 2 history. I think there's only like a few teams that could really match up to what they've done. And the reason a lot of people think they are the best 5-man lineup is because not only did they win a bunch of tournaments leading up into their TI victory, then they won TI, and then they did an entire year right after that, where they basically did like the best year after their TI victory. And basically what I'm getting at is the judgment value we are judging the Chinese teams is not being applied to Liquid in this particular case. What I mean by that is, it's okay for, like, basically we ignore all the failures that the Chinese teams do for like 3 out of the 3/4 of the year. But all of a sudden, when we're judging Liquid, we're like, oh shit, they're the best. And they're the best because they do it every single day. And they do it for the entire year. And though that criteria isn't being applied equally. If you want to say Liquid is the best because they showed up every day of that particular year and they played their best and they played incredibly great Dota, fair enough. But then you also have to say the Chinese teams consistently failed for 3/4 of the year. Therefore, none of them are nearly as good as we think they are, and they are judged as a result. And that's why I think a lot of people have been saying basically China as a region, China and Chinese teams in general have been worse overall, because they've basically gotten to this funk where they don't try until, well, I won't say they don't try, but like a lot of their teams aren't as good until those particular months. Right. Another way to think about it is, if you're only looking at TI, then you'd have to say something like, what's the best example? Okay, let's go to TI6. And from the years from the year preceding TI6, so 2015, 2016, I'd personally say the best team of that year was OG. And the reason I say OG is because I think they had the most consistent results. I think they were winning all the majors, right? And then when you go to Wings, Wings had a brief spike right before the TI6, and then they won TI6, and then they did nothing afterwards. Basically, they basically crumbled, and there are a lot of reasons as to why they crumbled. Whether it's because their style of play was basically absorbed by the rest of the world, whether it was because of Ace, whether it was because there was something magical, particularly magical about that 5-man lineup that broke apart after they won TI. Whatever the case may be, here's my question to you, basically, is does that make Wings better than OG? And I'd have to say no. Like, even though Wings won that TI, that doesn't necessarily make them a better team than any of those teams. Or I guess a more extreme example is TI8. Basically, OG pulled out a fucking miracle to win that fucking TI, right? Like, it was like the miracle of miracles of miracles. Those angels in the outfield shit. And it was one of the most memorable events I've ever seen in any game. But does that make OG a better team than Virtus Pro for that year? Hell no. You saw how fucking dominant Virtus Pro was that entire year. Now, you can criticize Virtus Pro for saying they are chokers at TI, and I think they are. But if we're trying to judge them based off of what we saw of that year, I'd say obviously Virtus Pro was better. And this is basically the point I'm getting at, is there are two simultaneous conversations going on, two simultaneous like sets of criteria going on in the minds of the Dota 2 community at times, where like TI is the only thing that matters. But then but then when it's convenient, they're like, oh, it doesn't really matter as much when you're talking about like Liquid or Virtus Pro, because these teams are so dominant. Like, it feels wrong to say that what they didn't matter. And I think while there's technically no objective analysis, in the sense that anybody who's ever done analysis understands that you have to put in your own. Eventually, if you break it down all the way to the bottom, you have to come up with a subjective choice of what you value above something else. Like, and so when you do that, though, like, even though there's no objective analysis, what you have to do is you have to figure out what your view of the world is, what your filters are, how you value these different things, and then you apply that consistently across the board. And that's kind of my problem with the way. Actually, that is my problem with the way a lot of Dota 2 analysis in the community or the discussion has gone for the last few years. Is like, basically it's never applied consistently. Like, Chinese teams can like fuck off for 3/4 of the year and do nothing, and then they show up at TI like, oh wow, they were always great. Like, no, it's not true. They did great at TI, but they were not good for the rest of the year, and therefore they are worse than they were before, right? Whereas like a team like Virtus Pro would be like, oh yeah, they're fucking amazing. Yeah, they are fucking amazing. But if TI is the only thing that matters, then they're trash relative to like OG or TI winners, because guess what? They don't make it happen. Like, that's kind of, or if you want another good example is like Secret, the All-Star version with Arteezy and Zai and all that shit. Like, they were a fucking dominant team, easily one of the most dominant we've ever seen, but they fucking trashed that TI. Now, does that mean that team was complete trash? No. It just means they were bad at TI. But what they did before that, all that shit still matters. And I think this is the point I'm getting at, is like, because TI exists, there's been a warped view of reality, I guess. And so I just wanted to say that regardless of how you judge these particular teams in time, you have to use the criteria you have and apply it consistently to all of the teams. So one more time, basically, if you don't think it matters that the Chinese teams just don't do shit for like 3/4 of the year because TI is the only thing that matters, then you have to apply the same logic to the Western teams. So, for instance, Virtus Pro, EG, Secret, all of them are qualified for TI right now. And thus, all the shit they do from now until TI doesn't matter. Like, does that even make sense? Of course, it all fucking matters. It's all part of your legacy, right? But even if you did buy into that argument, then you'd also have to say, fair enough. Like, in that case, VG Gaming's victory at the major didn't matter as much. And the reason is because the rest of the teams were disincentivized from winning. Just as people are trying to like imply, like, oh, well, those Western teams, they won the other 3/4 of the year, but the Chinese teams, they didn't really ramp up yet. Well, conversely, then, because Virtus Pro, EG, Secret, all of them already got their fucking ticket to TI at that point. Well, you can also say, therefore, VG Gaming did really fight the apex of the Western teams. And obviously this gets into a very weird angle of like how much do we actually know about the motivations of the respective teams and whatnot. But basically that's kind of my point. If you don't know, then don't know. Like if you don't know, then I'd err on the side of, well, all of it matters to some certain extent, and then you have to personally value judge where the years, the tournaments, the prestige, the levels of teams you play against, the meta, and all that shit. So I think that's it for this video. I'll see you guys later.